but I think it's just what my father said, as you mentioned, was that he said the two things in life that you can never be sure about. One is when you're going to die, and the other is how a film is going to do. And what that did for me was that when I started making movies, is that because it just lowered my expectations. I mean, we always hope for something good to happen, but there were no expectations per se, because you don't know. You really don't know what's going to strike a chord. So what I did was, I was inherently honest to myself and my work. I did it because I really wanted to do it. And so what he did liberated me in many ways.
Well, now it's even nowadays it'd be even different in your household. Friday afternoons would suck, because on Friday afternoons, exhibitors know how a film is going to do for the weekend, because you get your matinee figures sent to you electronically from how it's doing in New York. So think about it. The fate of the film, you can ask anyone in exhibition or distribution on a Friday afternoon and say, so how'd Dreamgirls do? And they'd say, well, the mats in New York were this, so we predict this, which means it would do that. Isn't that crazy? You know, on Friday afternoon now. Anyway, to that end though about exhibition, Alejandro and Bill, and I'm sure maybe secretly you have found yourself in a booth a time or two on opening weekend, but I know that the filmmakers, for those of you that don't know, they care so much, they spend so many years making sure that every scene is done perfectly, and the sound and the light and the direction is a certain way, and then it all has to do with the way that the film is shown up in a theater. And I know Bill shared a story once with us, Ginny, about how on opening weekend he would go from theater to theater, and if the sound wasn't right or the light level was down or there was a little bit of shaking, he'd run up into the booth and probably scare some 16-year-old projectionist and adjust it because of that love for cinema. And Alejandro, the stories are crazy about Alejandro in terms of what he does, and I'm sure that you must have that same thing, Deepa, where you think, okay, I've done this, especially water, which is so beautifully done. I would imagine that you pay particular attention to how it's shown.
Yes, and I think for all of us, to some degree, I mean, we all can relate to Cinema Paradiso. I mean, that's what it was.
Yes. I have to put a plug in for that. If you haven't seen Cinema Paradiso, please do. In fact, Philippe Noiret just passed away, and it was just such a great film, and for those of you that haven't seen it, it teaches you a lot about the love of film. It certainly affected me, no doubt. Ginny, question too about collaboration with men and women. You've worked with Bill on a few films. Thelma Schumacher has worked with Scorsese. You got Dee Dee Allen that has worked with Sidney Lumet and others. Is there a dynamic that exists, or is it just coincidence, or do you see a real kind of male-female bond that's created?
I think there's a dynamic that exists whether it's a male or whether it's a female, and I think when you meet the director, as when you're interviewed, you connect or you don't connect. And there are times when I've read a script and I think, oh, it's really nice and it sounds like it would be really great. And then I go in and I meet the director and we have nothing connecting us. Whatever it is, that sensibility is not there. And so you know that it's not going to be the experience which, of course, you imagined, or I imagine when I'm reading the script. When I met Bill, as I said, I was an assistant, and I was working for an editor who I'd worked with for a long time, named Marion Rothman, first woman editor I've ever worked with, and that was, I had only worked with, my dad and then all these different people in New York, and I would say she was a real mentor to me, because a woman in the business then, there weren't a lot of women film editors, and she was a very strong woman and had a very, she was very opinionated and very wonderful, but she would not let anybody get away with anything. And I came from my dad, who's much more laid back, and all of a sudden I'm working with this woman who really is just dynamic. And I think she was, really showed me a whole different aspect to what it's like being a woman in not just in the editing room, but in the film business. And what I was going to say is when I was working with her when I met Bill, and from the beginning, I mean, he was out shooting nights, and we were in this little everybody's in this little motel in, God knows, some swamp in Louisiana. And yet, from the very beginning, we connected. And I ended up doing some editing on that, and so from that point on, I worked with him, since then. But I really think sometimes you go into, you meet somebody, and whether, I think it happens in real life too, you meet, outside of films, you meet somebody at a party, whether it be a man or a woman or whoever, and you just connect. It's as if you feel like you've known that person before. And those are the kind of relationships that work in the film, in the editing room, because you're so, it's as if that person is your family. And Dreamgirls, it was a year. So a year of every day seeing Bill and other people around, obviously, my assistants who are all wonderful, but basically shutting the door and me and Bill being in that room day after day after day for a year. So you have to connect on more than just a working level.
I'm sure you have to share that vision almost. You have to get in his head and his brain and his sensibility, because that's where it all comes out.
And I think when you have a relationship with somebody like Thelma or, has with Martin or whoever, it just grows, and it's more, as I say, you're connecting on so many levels, and you trust. It's really about trusting on so many levels that it's